Okay, I'm Judy Hutchings. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Bangor University, and I want to start off by telling you a story about KIVA Bullying Prevention Programme, because I was at a conference at Cambridge University about 4 years ago, and I heard the person who developed this programme speaking about it, and I got extremely excited about it because it had so much really good evidence, and it just sounded like it did what we wanted it to do, that I imported it to Wales, and we've now done a couple of trials in Wales which we'll tell you about. And so the opportunity to talk to yourselves is really nice for us, because we've been researching it and we've been implementing it in Wales. And I couldn't find anything else that really had this level of evidence and seemed to be as effective as KIVA, which comes from Finland. So I've come at very short notice this morning from Wales because my colleague Dr. Sue Evans, who should have been speaking to you, got a really bad dose of flu and in fact ended up in hospital yesterday. So I've stepped in, but that's nice because she's one of our partners in the Welsh KIVA project. We also have Suzy, who's going to speak to you in a little while, who's doing a PhD on how the programme's working in Wales, and we have Elin over there, who's the administrator for our KIVA project for Wales, and of course we're interested in England as well, so want to tell you all about it. Anybody from Wales here? I noticed a couple of Welsh people on the... Yeah?
Originally.
Oh, originally, okay. Oh, originally, okay. No, we noticed that somebody from Children in Wales is here, but we don't know who she is, so we try and work out who she is later on. But she's not here, obviously. Yeah, she must be. Okay. So this is what I'm going to try and do. We have terribly long. We want to allow some time for discussion. Talk about what is bullying and the consequences. To touch briefly on why it might be of particular importance to people with an interest in autism, to introduce you to the KIVA programme, particularly with the focus on the role of the bystander and how, if we can change the behaviour of bystander children, we can support victims of bullying. And then just to touch very briefly on the evidence, because from Finland there are the first randomised controlled trial in Finland had 30,000 children in it, and subsequently been rolled out across Finland. So there's a lot of evidence already. And then Suzy's going to take over and just tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Wales. I'll try and stand still because it's creaky here, isn't it? Right, I'll do my best. Okay. So the first thing about bullying is that we need a definition that people agree with, because teachers certainly are reporting that children will come in from the playground and say, I've been bullied, or parents will come and say, my child's been bullied, and it isn't always something that we would define as bullying. Sometimes it's a fallout, somebody's been left out of a game, somebody's done something accidentally to upset someone. So this definition that was originally developed by Welsh in Norway is now widely used in research. So it has three components. First of all, it involves a power differential between the person or persons who are doing the bullying and the more vulnerable person. Secondly, it's deliberate. And thirdly, it's repeated. So in most of the research now that's going on worldwide into bullying, that this has become an accepted definition. And obviously it takes numerous forms, often verbal, public ridicule, and of course more recently we've been seeing a lot about cyberbullying as well. So here's our definition. The same child is repeatedly caused harm or distress. They find it hard to defend themselves because they're weaker. Maybe they're new in the class, don't know other pupils, because it's a group against one person or some other reason. A teacher, for example, told me fairly recently that in a reception class that a parent came in with a whole lot of birthday invitations and said, you know, we're inviting everybody in the class except there isn't one for you know who. Clearly that child's being identified as different, and the only child, the teacher of course said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. But so we're quite clear that, do you agree? Yes. Well, do you agree with that?
Do you agree to what?
That this is what represents bullying. I didn't realise that's why. So if we go on, is this where we're coming? All right, okay. What doesn't Suzy put this together? And as I said, I've arrived just to deliver it.
Too late.
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Bullying is a normal part of growing up. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. These are the kind of things that children who've been bullied will have said to them, or rather something else. So the consequences of bullying and victimisation are very well researched. In fact, Christina Salmivalli in Turku University in Finland, who developed this programme, she's a social psychologist, and she'd done 20 years of research into the bullying phenomenon before the Finnish government asked her to develop a programme. And she'd looked at adults who recalled being bullied, the effect on them. She looked at peer relationships in children. She just produced, if you look at her publications, a vast amount of research just about the nature of bullying. So consequences of bullying, well, anxiety, depression, loneliness. We've had some very high profile cases of children taking their own lives, of course, as a result of bullying. Bullying others, learning to use aggression as a means to get what one wants, and the risk that children who bully will continue to have other difficulties in later life, will be possibly criminal, associated with antisocial adolescence and so on. Both bully and victimisation. Sometimes there are kids who are bullied but then model the same behaviour to others but are even more vulnerable. So in the research it looks at who are victims, what's their experience, who are bullies, what's their experience, what's the long-term consequence, and also looks at these bully victims who are in fact the most maladjusted. So let's just think about autism for a moment. Why are we particularly interested? We're interested in all children who get bullied, of course. But within the general population, approximately 13% of children are reporting being bullied, and that would be fairly typical of the surveys that we've been doing in Wales as well. However, if you talk to children on the autistic spectrum or with autism, 40% will report being bullied. According to parent reports, this rises to between 60 to 90% for children with Asperger's syndrome. So we're talking about, we've talked about power status, vulnerability. We're talking about a group of children and young people who are more likely to be the victims of bullying. Suzy looked up some of the material about what makes children with autism more vulnerable. They can be living in a world of their own. They can be lacking social skills, have difficulties with non-verbal behaviour. They may act in unconventional ways, not understanding social norms and rules. They may have sensory difficulties. They may be over or undersensitive to particular things, noise, smell, and so on. And they may have very special or narrow interests in certain topics. The result is that for children with autism, they may not fit in easily with their peers and may be more susceptible to bullying, which is certainly what the research, what the surveys are telling us. So Suzy also picked up this for me, showing some of the effects on children with autism. So you see refusing to go to school, changing schools, missing school, having a negative impact on social skills and relationships, having a negative impact on mental health, schoolwork suffering, and damages to self-esteem. So there are a wide-ranging series of effects of bullying on children experiencing autism. What can we do about it? Well, we've got a very powerful quote here from Martin Luther King that really speaks to Christina Salmi-Valley's work. In the end, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And one of the reasons why Christina Salmi-Valley was asked to develop the programme was because in her 20 years of research as a social psychologist, she had established that a key feature of the memory of people who had been bullied as children was that it wasn't the bully, it was the fact that nobody else did anything about it. It was the role of other people, the role of the bystander that they said, it was happening to me and other people did nothing about it. So a key part of this KIVA programme is about changing the behaviour of other people, because clearly that some of the features of children who are bullied are things that are not going to change. So we can't just change the victims, we need to change the environment in which they are to make it more supportive. I just realised we didn't have that slide about bullying in general, did we? Okay, so here we're going to the KIVA website. Just to show you a little bit. KIVA stands for nice. It's the Finnish word for nice. But ki and va also are the first two letters of the two words that say against bullying. Thank you. Okay, so I've just mentioned to you the meaning of KIVA, which means nice, but also stands for against bullying. It's the two letters at the beginning of the two words that stand for against bullying. So it's an acronym, but it's also kind of a very friendly word. I've mentioned that it's developed at Turku, and because of the fantastic results, it's now used in over 90% of schools in Finland. So what happened was the Finnish government came, they monitored bullying. They required, as we do in Britain, they required schools to have an anti-bullying policy. And the schools had an anti-bullying policy, but they monitored it for 10 years and found it didn't make any change in the reported levels of bullying. It's in the policy, but it's not in the practice. So they asked Christina Salmivalli, because of her 20 years of research, to develop a programme. And this is the programme that we're going to spend a little bit of time telling you about. We've translated the material now into Welsh, and we've translated the American into English to use in the UK. So their prevalence of bullying was slightly below average. Of course, they've got very high academic standards in Finland, but they had no change, as I've said. So here they gave the contract to Turku University to develop a programme. And Christina Salmivalli's work about the social architecture of bullying underpins this programme. Bullying can be a strategy to gain status and power over other children. Bullies can be perceived as popular, although interestingly they're not necessarily the people you would invite to your party, but they are perceived as popular. Bullying maintains their status in a group, and status increases over time. So by choosing victims who are submissive, they can repeatedly demonstrate this power and status. So Christina's work produced this map, if you like, of the participant roles in bullying. So she found that 8% of children were bullies, and another 7% were bullies' helpers. They actually joined in with the bullying once it started. However, another 20% were what she described as the reinforcers of the bullies, the people who stood by and maybe laughed. They didn't directly join in with the taunts or with what was happening, but they were part of an audience that was allowing the bully to continue, possibly reinforcing the bully with laughter. There were another 24%, she found, who were outsiders, who were probably aware that it was happening, but were not prepared to do anything about it, maybe because they were afraid that they themselves would be bullied, or for other reasons, but they would either not join in, not laugh, but probably turn away, behave as if they didn't know it was happening. And then she found a group of children who defended victims, and of course the victims themselves. So this was her map of the social architecture of bullying, and the role of the programme is to change the behaviour of the outsiders and the behaviour of the reinforcers, and then through them change the behaviour of the bullies and the bullies' helpers by removing the power, status and the things that go with bullying. In her surveys to find out what children thought about bullying, she found that most children thought that bullying, or said that bullying was wrong. However, many of them ended up following the bully, laughing or remaining silent. So it's not that they don't know that bullying is wrong, it's just that they don't behave in ways that help to reduce it. The victim's friend is often, being friends with the victim is often not allowed. If you're going to play with her, you can't play with me. You're not supposed to accept the victim. Some of her research again, the behaviour of those bystanders, the onlookers, does matter. In the short term, victims who are defended are better adjusted than undefended ones. And as I said before, the most long-term negative memory is that nobody cared. At classrooms where bullying is, where children are reinforcing bullies, their bullying behaviour increases, more frequent, and individual level risk factors are more likely in those classrooms to result in being victimised. So the role of the KIVA programme, the core feature of it, is that all pupils in the school will understand that they have a responsibility and that they can make a difference. Let's stop bullying together. This is the core feature of the programme. So as I said before, we don't necessarily need to change the victims. we can't necessarily change the victims. They may have all sorts of features that make them vulnerable. They may be physical features, they may be different types of disabilities, they may be social circumstances. There's a whole lot of things that might make children more vulnerable. But, and the universal part of the component of the programme tackles that whole school culture and environment. There's also a separate part of the programme that deals with how you work with the bullies and the victims when an incidence of bullying has occurred. So that's the programme, both the universal, the classroom lessons, all of the materials, tools, lesson plans. There are 20, basically 20 45-minute lessons a year. I don't know if Suzy's probably got this in the slides that come later, but we, in Finland they start school at 7, so this programme's been researched with 7 to 15-year-olds. In our initial trial we only had the 9, 10, 11-year-old bit in English, so that was what we used in our pilot. Now we've got the Unit 1, so we're working with 7 to 11-year-olds. The unit for secondary age children hasn't yet been translated into English. But there are a large amount of materials, lesson plans and so on. It's not merely a philosophy. And as you saw a little bit in that presentation, children get to play online KIVA games, which they can play in school or at home. They have a password to be able to log in if they have internet access at home and play games that help them to practice the skills they need to stand against bullying. So it teaches what to do, when to do it and how to do it. At the school level there has to be a real commitment to the school being a KIVA school, and Ellen here is going to show you the KIVA vests that are worn on the playground by supervising staff on the playground to remind children that we're a KIVA school and that bullying is not tolerated in our school. There are also posters with lots of friendly words on them, like saying hi, hello, how are you, do you want to play with me, and also saying we don't condone bullying. The pupils come online once a year, every July, or June or July, and they complete an anonymous survey in which they say whether they have bullied and whether or not they have been bullied and how aware they are of bullying in their school. And those data, then that's repeated year on year on year. So the main outcome data for KIVA is the pupil report. So when a school signs up to be a KIVA school, apart from the training, the class lessons and all the other things that they'll get, they get access to the survey so that the children can year on year report their experience of bullying. And that's the report which has shown year on year reductions in levels of children reporting being bullied, and of children, amazingly, children do report bullying in those surveys, that they are bullies, and that also has reduced, and we'll show you our results in a bit. So that's where the programme starts, with the children recording what their experience is anonymously. Those data are fed back to the school year on year, and alongside their own school data, which nobody else sees, they also get the data for the whole of the country. So they can see how the children in their school are responding relative to, for example, in our case, schools in Wales in general. And they can also see year on year, are their children reporting less bullying? So I've mentioned the lessons, and there are 2 units that apply to Key Stage 2, which in fact cover more than 50% of the personal social health education curriculum for Key Stage 2. We've mapped it onto the PSHE curriculum, so that if schools are delivering it, they are also meeting their commitments to more than half of that curriculum. So the lessons include here, slightly out of focus, isn't it? But learning by doing, activities, role plays, all sorts of activities, lining themselves up in various ways to demonstrate what they know or how they feel about particular things. Quite a big emphasis on learning about and labelling emotions, thinking about how other people might feel and so on. The computer games test the learning that goes on in the lessons. I know, I can, I do. So those are the 3 stages of any learning. I realised after I came across KIVA, I'm using this in all of the other programmes to kind of get people to think about what's involved in learning. You have to have the knowledge about what you're supposed to do. You have to learn how to do it, and then you have to do it. And KIVA very structured in the way that it teaches the knowledge, it rehearses children in the actions, and then it gives them the opportunities to demonstrate that they're doing it. The games are closely connected to the lessons and specifically about enhancing the awareness of bystanders and generating empathy for victims. There's also a parent's guide, and parents are told this is a KIVA school, this is the policy, this is how KIVA deals with incidents of bullying. If schools want to, they can of course feed back the results of their KIVA survey to parents. That's their choice. But there's a very nice parents' guide telling parents how to identify bullying and so on. Alongside all of that universal stuff, the posters, the school assemblies, the jackets, the class lessons, the support for parents, there's a separate component that deals with tackling bullying. And for each school we train what we call a KIVA team, mainly school staff, because you need somebody there who will be able to deal with it very quickly if an incident is confirmed as bullying. But we've also had educational psychologists, school governors, counsellors and so on as part of this KIVA team who come together to deal with actual incidents of bullying. So this is the other half of the programme. And this involves, as quickly as possible, individual discussions with the victim and then subsequently with the bullied child or children. It's never recommended to see them together. The victim may not be able to speak in front of the bully may deny it, they could behave badly towards the child outside of it. So the research tells us you have to do this separately. You have to see the child first and find out what's happened. You have to share with them that you are there to support them, that something is going to happen. There is a referral form that the teacher or the playground staff or whoever put to the KIVA team because they have to decide, does it meet the criteria for bullying? Does it involve status difference? Is it repeated? Is it deliberate? Or is it a misunderstanding or a fallout or a disagreement, in which case it would be dealt with in the way that the class teacher or other people would normally deal with it. In addition to interviewing the victim, whilst interviewing the victim, the member of the KIVA team asks them who in your class or in the school has not joined in with bullying. And then the class teacher is asked to ask those other peers to help the child, to support them, to let them know Mary's been having a problem, people have been taking her clothes and hiding them, they've been calling her names, I need your help. So high status children who are not involved in bullying are recruited to support the child. When the bully or bullies are interviewed, and if they're a group they would be interviewed individually, there are 2 ways of dealing with it, and the one is to say you did it, it's got to stop, and the other is to what we call the non-confrontational approach, where you simply are sharing with the bully that this child has had a problem and you need that bully to help you with a plan, because we're a KIVA school, to stop. Now Christina did a big randomised controlled trial where half of the teachers used the confrontational approach and said you did it, it's got to stop, and the other half simply said Mary's having a problem, we need your help, what are you going to do to help? And the results were identical. So it became apparent that there was no need to challenge the bully and put the bully in the position of saying, no, I never did it, yes you did, no I didn't, who said so? Simply the focus of the meeting is to say, Mary's having a problem, I need your help, we're a KIVA school, what are you going to do? And then very often the child will say, well, I never did it, we've role played and practiced this lots of times. And the teacher or the KIVA team is saying, that's not what we're talking about here, we're just saying it's happening, it's got to stop, how will you help? And then with the victim and with the bullies, this is all scripted in the programme, exactly how you handle these interactions. The only time when there was a slight difference between the two of them was with the 14, 15, 16-year-olds, where actually sometimes confrontation worked a little better than non-confrontation, but even then they both worked. But clearly with our younger children, with our primary, with our early secondary age children, we don't need to confront the bully, we just need them to know they're in a KIVA school and they need to help us to help the bullied child. So in Finland, there was a large, more randomised controlled trial, 2007-8, 2008-9, followed by a broad rollout because the results were so good. So they had 30,000 children, aged 7 to 15, in the first randomised controlled trial. And I've mentioned already some of these things, but they measured the bullying and victimisation from children's reports, the bystanders' behaviours, attitudes, empathy, self-efficacy, depression, anxiety, some of the things that were mentioned earlier on as being positive outcomes from the programme, including school liking, academic motivation. It reduced multiple forms of bullying, although it was a class-based taught programme with a school philosophy. The results showed that it produced benefits for all of these different sorts of bullying: verbal, social exclusion, physical, social manipulation, material, taking things, threats, racism, sexual, and cyberbullying. And the effects were particularly good on the verbal, physical, and cyberbullying. And since cyberbullying is the thing that we're hearing most about now, I thought that was a very helpful kind of finding. It also influenced children's perceptions on their teachers' attitudes and how the teacher was, and how well the teacher was doing, because all of the earlier studies seemed to show that children thought teachers A, didn't know about it, or B, when teachers intervened it made things worse because of the ways that they intervened. Improved teachers' self-evaluations of their competence to tackle bullying. We've touched on these before, other benefits: reducing anxiety, depression, increasing school liking. When they looked at the results for the specific work of the KIVA team, almost 80% of bullying incidents stopped completely as a result of that process, and a further 18.5% reduced. Only 2% of bullying incidents dealt with by KIVA teams did not improve. And then, of course, you have to move on to other school policies. You may end up excluding children, or you may end up taking on other sorts of strategies. But 98% of cases dealt with by KIVA teams either improved in 80% of cases or significantly reduced. So that was pretty powerful results. They then went to the broad rollout. The Finnish government funded all of this, by the way. They put megabucks into developing the programme, into the randomised controlled trial, and then rolling it out to the whole of Finland because the results were so good. So now we have 90% of all schools in Finland implementing KIVA, over 1,000 schools. The effects were weaker. They were not as good as the RCT, and there was variation across the age levels. Again, the strongest effects were around age 11, so 7 to 11, 12. Weakest effects with the 14 to 16-year-olds. It's going to be interesting to see in Finland now, as the children go through year on year, whether the cumulative effect of KIVA does have an impact on those 14 to 16-year-olds. But in this study, of course, we're saying 14 to 16-year-olds who are getting KIVA for the first time did not have such strong effects as the younger children. But then we know about early intervention and the need to intervene early in pretty well absolutely everything. I've spent my life on it. So Christina calculated that in a Finnish student population of 500,000 students, the reductions would have amounted to about 7,500 bullies and 12,500 victims in one school year. That's the number of cases of bullying that are reduced according to the feedback from children about their experience as a result of implementing KIVA. Currently, there's an evaluation going on in America, in the Netherlands, in our own in Wales, and in Estonia. They've got smaller pilots now going on in Japan and the European School in Luxembourg. And now I think Suzy's going to take over and tell you why or how, after I got so excited about KIVA. Christina was speaking in Dublin and London, and I said to her, do you know what, the route from Dublin to London goes through Bangor, please come and talk in Bangor. And this was back in 2011. We were the only people in the whole of Britain or Ireland to take up KIVA and decide we wanted to implement it. I've done a lot of implementing evidence-based programmes in Wales for the last 40 years, and this just seemed to me like another one that was needed, and we would try it in Wales. So Suzy's going to tell you what we've been doing. There. Thank you. I need to hold that to get down, otherwise I'm going to fall. Great.
Okay. My name's Suzy, as Judy said, and I'm a research assistant at Bangor University and a PhD student in Judy's Centre. In 2012, I was lucky enough to gain KES funding and, with the support of Judy's Centre, to complete a master's and evaluate the pilot of KIVA in Wales. The project was small and it involved 17 schools, 14 of those are in Wales, and we also had 3 schools from Cheshire that were really interested, and they were funded locally. We used Unit 2, as Judy mentioned before. It was the first one to be translated. The reason it was translated first was because it had got the largest results and the best results, and so at the time that was the only one that we could use. We were lucky enough to have the Finnish KIVA team come over and train our schools. We then supported them through termly support and feedback sessions, and we held these sessions across 3 locations in Wales. We collected data from the KIVA online survey for the pupils, and we also did teacher surveys to find out what they thought about the programme, how it fitted. And we did these midpoint and at the end point. These are the results I got for my masters. The red is the pre-test and the blue is the post-test. The victimisation came out at approximately 16% at the baseline and went down to 10%. And for bullying was 6% and went down to 2%. And both of these reductions are significant.
And are being reported next month in Education and Child Psychology. The paper's being published next month with all of these results in it.
Okay. So, as I said, the pupil results, but what we also found off the teachers were they were really, really enthusiastic and positive about the lesson content and the structure, because the lessons are written out so well for them. Teachers reported that between 75% to 100% of the pupils were really, really engaged with the material. And they even said that children started using KIVA as a verb and were asking when they would be KIVAing next. So obviously that was really good. The majority of the teachers also said that they felt that they could actually observe and see that there was an impact on their classes. They thought child well-being was improved, behaviour, and they also thought the classroom and the playground atmosphere were better. We were lucky enough also to have another master's student that came and did a second year follow-up. And what Lisa found was that the results, she followed up children that had been in year 5 and that had went on to year 6. Because obviously we'd only been able to look at the 9 to 11-year-olds with only having Unit 2. And the reductions that had been found, there was still smaller reductions again, but the reductions that had been found were maintained. So obviously this is really
obviously our year 6
positive.
Pupils had already gone on to secondary school, so we just had that sample of those from year 5 that we could follow for 2 years.
In 2013, we were also lucky enough to get some lottery funding, and this enabled us, in partnership with the Social Research Unit in Dartington, to conduct a randomised controlled trial with 20 schools. We Unit 2 has also now been, Unit 1, sorry, has now been translated. So we were able to aim the programme at the whole of Key Stage 2. So all 4 years from 3 to 6 are now having the programme. We've got 11 intervention schools and 9 waitlist control schools, and that's approximately 3,000 pupils. We stratified, did stratified randomisation, so we did it by school size and also the level of disadvantage. For level of disadvantage, we actually used the percentage of free school meals. We're now actually in phase 2 of the programme and halfway through. In phase 1, the academic year 2013, only the intervention schools received the programme, and now in phase 2, all of the schools are receiving the programme. To make things fair, we actually gained funding for all of the schools to implement the programme for 2 years. So the control schools will continue with the programme next year. The funding enabled us to fully train all of the schools, provide them with resources, the online materials, the access to the game, the access to the survey. We also provided termly support and feedback sessions, email and telephone support. The feedback sessions that we held were to support the schools, but also for us to gain feedback, which we found really, really valuable, and has helped us to progress with other things. But the schools found the feedback sessions really, really helpful. They were able to share ideas about what they'd done, how the children felt about the lessons, and it also highlighted a few challenges that there were. So good practices that were found was the paperwork trail. So when an incident's reported, there's a screening form where they decide whether this incident needs to be followed up or not, and then there's the a forms filled in for the victim, a forms filled in for the bully, and then the follow-up form. And a lot of the head teachers have said this is really, really good format, and they're able to see if things are happening on a regular basis with the same child, and it also gives them, if a parent comes in, they can say they've done this, and school inspectors. The challenge of time, it was seen as a disadvantage and also as a positive. The time was the lessons and the activities produced really, really important discussions, and the teachers thought that this was amazing, but sometimes the discussions were so important that they felt it was really, really difficult to cut things short because it was so important, and sometimes they went over their allotted times. So what we did then was we looked at the PSHE curriculums in England and Wales just to map them onto the exercise so that we could try helping the schools save some time, and we found that obviously 50% of the lessons were covered within the curriculum. So obviously that was some help because those lessons didn't have to be planned, they were already planned out for them. The results of the RCT were aiming to report on the self-reported victimisation, the self-reported bullying, social and emotional well-being, also school attendance to see if obviously that's improved, and school connectedness. Our centre now is offering training, and I don't know if Judy would like to explain the training a little bit more and the 2 options that we've got.
Okay. Well, we went to Finland last year for a week to be trained in order to disseminate this programme. Obviously we were trained in order to train our schools in Wales, but we've now been given a broader training contract. So we're now offering, through my Centre for Evidence-Based Early Intervention at Bangor, of which you have newsletters and material here, training for schools, which is a 2-day training, or what I'm more interested in, because I'm interested in broader dissemination, is training for trainers who will be licensed with Finland, and the trainers will be given a license to train schools within their area or locality, and we'll support that from Bangor, and it'll also be supported from Finland. And you've got a lot of material about that in your folders. So I think if that's your last slide, maybe we should just take some questions. How are we doing on time? I've given you my watch up there. We've got 10 minutes, have we, or 5 minutes? I've lost track of how long we've got. Anybody got any questions anyway? Thank you for your attention and listening.
Are there any plans on rolling this out to secondary schools?
Well, we're interested obviously in the secondary curriculum once it's translated, because it had slightly not less good outcomes as the primary, as the 7 to 11, 12-year-olds. They're actually reviewing it in Finland and they're adding in new material, so it is changing as we speak. But nevertheless, although they didn't get as good results, they did get positive results from the secondary programme. The games are very different, for example, because the games involve you online, you go into the KIVA street and you can go into a police station and ask, is bullying a crime? Or you can go to court and say, you know, what would be sentence? Or you can go to see a psychologist and do some tests on whether you have empathy. Or so the nature of the programme is different in that respect. But we're very keen to trial it once we have our hands on it. Because we've had such an enthusiastic response from our schools and teachers to the 7 to 11, 12-year-old work. We could implement in secondary schools with Unit 2 at the start of secondary school. It is much harder, of course, to work in secondary schools because the kids, you just don't have the continuity of the same class teachers and trying to, because KIVA is a whole school approach that requires that you have all of your teachers, everybody, your playground staff and so on, to be taught by the KIVA lead in the school about what being a KIVA school involves. Those are challenges in secondary school. And I must admit, most of my 41 years of work now as a psychologist have been with 0 to 11-year-olds because it's kind of easier to get. So I think we're keen to carry on what we're doing, but we're also interested. But at the moment, that programme's not been provided.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up from that, I mean, I take your point, but from my experience, about 90% of the bullying of autistic children that causes their collapse is in secondary schools, is in year 7 to 9. But I would reinforce the things you're saying about the no blame, the way of conducting something for no blame, where you're saying, you know, the main, what I want is your cooperation. How much can you help?
Yes. That's reviewed.
And I think in the case of disabled kids, autistic kids, that's very powerful. Is not saying you have bullied an autistic child, but this is what autism. And I think although
so it's psychoeducational,
autism creates enormous vulnerabilities, like you said, and makes them much more vulnerable. But it also, once that's explained to bullies, and once that's explained in a social group, which includes the pro-social ones as well, that if that explanation is done right, that can be very powerful.
Well, that process goes on through the class lessons, and in the class lessons the children come up with the KIVA rules. So the KIVA rules start, as you go through the year, they start with things like respect is for everyone and difference is celebrated, and then they go on to much more specific things like we will not stand for bullying, we'll defend the bullied child, and so on. So so that's going on there, as well as within the ways that specific identified incidents occur. The biggest challenge, I think, is that there's still quite a big mismatch between the levels of bullying being reported by children in the surveys and the level that's being picked up and dealt with in schools as specific incidents. So I think there's still a challenge to ensure that schools find it and deal with it. But when they do, it seems to be okay.
The thing with the programme is, though, obviously the results were from the children that had just obviously the KIVA 3, and hopefully by the time the children have actually had KIVA 1, KIVA 2 and KIVA 3, then those results from KIVA 3 might be again improved upon. Yes. Well,
we'd hope so.
Yeah.
But we need to work, we still need to do something with those secondary age kids. I just think I don't.
So absolutely, but yeah. It's a different culture.
Thank you. We've got 1, 2, 3 people.
Did you have any special schools in the sample?
We've got
special units attached to the schools, but not actually specific. Yes, we've got separate data from them, but obviously we haven't analysed that yet.
Right.
And Powys Authority, which is the backbone of Wales, goes from 15 miles south of the top to 15 miles north of the bottom, have taken it on as a whole county strategic approach. And they've already trained 11, they've got another, they've only got about 40 schools or something, they've only got 120,000 population altogether. But they've taken it, and they're taking it to all of their schools, and some within the 11 schools they've got a couple of schools that are only special schools, so they will be having their data, but they're in their first year of doing it. So yeah, we're very interested. There was a proposal about a year ago, we tried to get together with a lot of other European countries to do an evaluation of KIVA in special schools, but we couldn't get ourselves together with the funding in time. But when it comes around again, that's a possibility.
Risk of throwing myself to the lions.
I'm sorry if we dragons, we're dragons, not lions, from Wales.
I'm a foster care with Bucks. Have been for 15 years, and we've had about 50 children through our hands. So we've had a good interaction with schools. They're mainly teenage children, but there have been some tweenies, that's kids that are coming up, just coming to the end of their primary school. Our experience is that primary schools recognise and accept that there might be a bullying problem, and secondary schools don't. We don't have a bullying problem in our school. There's no such thing. Doesn't exist. No, we don't have a problem. Your child must be mistaken. And that is a real problem. Now, how do you address a problem like that? Hang on, I've got some other points as well.
Well, how do you address the problem? I don't know. I mean, Suzy's, by the way, got a paper being published in The Psychologist this next month, and we've got the one with our pilot. And I'm making the point all the time that we're where Finland was before they started KIVA. We're telling our schools to have a policy, but we are not monitoring it in a way that tells us whether it's working, and we're not giving them the tools to do it. So I'm wanting that we get some strategic lead from government, but that takes time. But we've already had 2 school inspections. In Wales they're called ESTIN, our school inspectors. We've had 2 ESTIN inspections now where the fact that the school was delivering KIVA, they're both primary schools of course because that's where we're working, has been highlighted as a real positive effect on the school climate. So we're beginning to get through the inspectors. The Welsh inspector had also produced a document on bullying in July. You can get it off their website, and that featured, case studied one of our schools from our trial as a case study example. So I'm going for, it takes time. You see, that's the way we've worked with other programmes in Wales. We start at the bottom, we do it, we show it works. We start pushing the information up towards the government, and then we start saying to them, you know what, you've got to do something about this. There are dozens of strategies and programmes and workshops about anti-bullying, but they've got no evidence.
Buck's strategy about anti-bullying was to get rid of their anti-bullying coordinator.
Oh, right, okay.
But another
and then the lady behind you had a question too, but I'll see.
Another issue is cyberbullying.
Yeah.
Cyberbullying is seen by Ofcom and various authoritative survey to be the biggest issue on e-safety. Is there any way we can look at adapting this to...
It does address cyberbullying as you go through the lessons, and it teaches children what is bullying. It includes cyberbullying and being cyber safe. And I don't know if we could fish that slide up, or I could certainly email it to you, or you could get it from the KIVA website that shows how effective the programme is across a whole range of different types of bullying, including particularly cyberbullying. So it is, certainly for our primary age kids, it is having an impact on that, but of course the biggest challenge there again is secondary age. And
it is a secondary age issue, really.
Yeah, an awful lot of the research shows that children that do cyberbully actually bully
in other ways as well.
In other ways as well.
And
so
they
by
probably
doing that,
do it in groups as well. You know, they probably don't sit on their own and do it. The kid who gets it may not know where it's come from, but probably the person who's doing it is doing it with other people laughing and joining in. So the working on the bystanders may be why the programmes...
The work that you do at the primary school level will be taken, hopefully...
Oh, I hope so.
...at 11, because they'll leave their primary school, won't they? They'll then go on to the secondary school. Hopefully they've got enough information to actually
It's why I'm so keen on this training the trainer stuff. If we could get, for example, a trainer who worked with a cluster of primary schools that all fed into one secondary school. I mean, at the moment we've got a random sample of schools from across Wales. We haven't got anywhere in Wales where all the feeder primary schools to one secondary school are all doing KIVA. But if you could do that, then you could start to have that impact.
That might be one of the ways to actually do it, because the primary school, when you've left the primary school, they're all going to go off to different schools, aren't they?
Well, we're definitely advertising. Here in this little booklet you have some of the stuff we've published about the effects and the trial and so on, but also about the training and why we're offering it and who we think we should target to become local authority trainers or local authority anti-bullying coordinators that would then train the schools in their area and support them. Because we can't do that from Bangor, not if we want this to be widespread. Somebody had a...
I was just going to ask whether you, for your findings, whether you've got any information yet about the effectiveness for the general population as opposed to children with autism?
No.
No.
Oh,
are you likely to get that?
Well, the general population of children.
Who are being delivered the programme, who are receiving the programme, is there any difference statistically yet that you have?
Well, with the children's report, I mean, what we don't have data on children with autism at the moment. We only have data on the children, the whole school populations, and we're showing statistical differences in reported levels of bullying by children as a whole. And we're starting with the work that we're doing with Dartington. We've also got teacher rated strengths and difficulties on children, and we're matching teacher ratings of children and their difficulties with children's, that's why it's taken us so long, with children's reported whether they're bullied or not. So we'll start to be able to assess who are more vulnerable and whether they're the ones that change and how they change. So that's
fascinating next step.
Yeah, we'll come next year. Thank you.
Or the year after.
Or the year after, it might take more. Yeah.
Very quick question on outcome data. You said you've got school data which is reported back versus national data. Is that whole national or just KIVA schools national?
Just KIVA schools. Yeah, no, because they're the only ones that have done the survey. So at the moment, we're just about to try and put it together because we had 17 schools in our pilot, 20 schools we got baseline for our randomised controlled trial. Powys has done another 11 schools, so we've got 31, 41, 49 schools now, which is a fair representation of schools in Wales, and we'll be able to look at that by, for example, one of our schools has 75% free school meals, one of our KIVA schools. I mean, it's the top of Rhondda on Tav. It's the most disadvantaged school in Wales probably, and they're one of our KIVA schools, and that's why we've looked at things like free school meal. We'll be able to look at the impact. We'll be able to look at the levels of bullying in different types of schools and also the impact for those schools as well. There was another question.
I just wanted to say something about secondary schools. And I think one of the gaps, I've got a 14-year-old, and I also work in schools and do workshops, and I'm also a youth magistrate. And I think that one of the gaps is in actually working with parents. If you hear teenagers talking about situations where they talk about their peers or whatever, sometimes my daughter will say, oh, so-and-so said this, and I think, well, where have they heard that? They've heard that at home. And it's almost like parents need to be taught how not to bully, what attitudes they have to people with disabilities too. And I think like maybe if that's something to kind of be looked at alongside, because I think it is very difficult to teach teenagers if they're getting cyberbullying. I mean, the amount of times I've seen adults showing platform stuff and blah blah blah, it's hilarious. And so it's almost like there's a whole generation that haven't been taught and they're adults now. And so I kind of think working with parents and get them to acknowledge that they could be bullying themselves.
If you want to go away and look at the KIVA website, the parent book on the KIVA website is open to anybody. It's not just parents of kids. It tries to teach parents how to deal with it, but we haven't evaluated it. Our schools, when our schools have held back to school nights to introduce KIVA, they've had 4 parents. They found that what they're doing now is they're putting little bits about KIVA into other evenings where parents do come because. Sorry? Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the next step. At the moment, we're just trying to get the schools to deliver it well, make sure it happens.
That's why teenagers are hard to reach.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're right. I know we've run out of time, but thank you for your time, everybody. Thank you so much. And